Woman in the closet. Woman found living in man's closet. In May 2008, a seemingly ordinary man living in Fukuoka, Japan, discovered something so bizarre that it made international headlines and left many questioning how well they really know their homes. The man, who remained unnamed in official reports, was a 57-year-old truck driver living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the Kasuya district. His life was quiet, uneventful. He worked during the day and returned home in the evenings. But over time, he began to notice strange things. Food was going missing. At first, it was subtle. A carton of juice a little lower than he remembered. Packaged food disappearing faster than it should have. He initially chalked it up to forgetfulness, thinking maybe he'd just eaten more than he thought or misplaced something. But as time passed, it became clear that this wasn't just forgetfulness. Something wasn't right. The man became increasingly uneasy. He lived alone. He kept his doors locked. There were no signs of a break-in, but items were being moved. Food continued to disappear. It got to the point where he began to suspect that someone might be entering his apartment while he was at work. Disturbed by the thought and unable to find any other explanation, he decided to take action. He purchased a small surveillance camera, the kind you might install to keep an eye on pets or monitor your front door. He set it up in his kitchen area where the missing food had been stored. Then he went to work, leaving the camera running. When he returned home that evening, he reviewed the footage. What he saw shocked him to his core. At around 1:30 in the afternoon, when he was long gone and the apartment was quiet, a panel in a cupboard high above a built-in closet in the hallway began to slide open. From within the small dark storage space, a human hand reached out. Slowly, carefully, a figure emerged. It was a woman, thin, disheveled, barefoot. She lowered herself from the closet space, with practiced movements, landing silently on the floor. She appeared calm, as though she had done this many times before. On camera, she was seen walking into the kitchen, opening the refrigerator, and helping herself to food and drink. Then, just as quietly, she walked back toward the hallway, climbed back into the closet space, and slid the panel shut behind her. Shocked, the man immediately contacted the police and presented them with the footage. When officers arrived at the apartment, they inspected the storage area above the closet, a small, narrow compartment barely large enough to lie down in. When they opened it, they found the woman inside. She did not resist arrest. She appeared calm and coherent. According to police, she had brought a thin mattress and a few plastic bottles of water into the space, and had been living there for approximately 1 year without the man's knowledge. She would emerge only when he was out, eat small amounts of food, use the bathroom, and return to her hiding spot. Authorities identified her as a 58-year-old woman, but her name was never released to the public. She had no known address and no family contact information. She was believed to be homeless and had entered the apartment about a year earlier when the man left his door unlocked, possibly by accident. Once inside, she discovered the unused overhead storage compartment and decided to stay. Police believe she chose that particular apartment not because of the man himself, but because of its layout and accessibility. The storage space, common in many Japanese apartments, was seldom used, especially by people living alone. She was able to remain completely undetected for months by living quietly and minimally. The woman was arrested and charged with trespassing specifically unlawful residence without consent. There were no additional charges filed. No property had been damaged. She had stolen only small amounts of food, enough to survive. The man, while shaken, had not been physically harmed. When interviewed by the media, a Fukuoka police spokesperson said, "We searched the house, checking everywhere someone could possibly hide. We then slid open the closet door and saw her curled up inside." Another officer told reporters that the woman had nowhere else to go. The story quickly went viral, both in Japan and internationally. was picked up by Reuters, BBC, and numerous Japanese news outlets. Readers were shocked and fascinated in equal measure. The case was dubbed "The Woman in the Closet," or "Closet Intruder," by the media. What made the case especially chilling was its plausibility. This wasn't a ghost story or a horror film. This was a real, documented event. A woman had managed to live undetected in a man's home for an entire year. She had used his bathroom, eaten his food, and watched him go about his daily life, all without making herself known. She wasn't hiding in a basement or a crawl space. She was overhead, just a few feet from where he slept. Japanese social commentators noted that the story highlighted growing issues around homelessness in Japan, particularly among the elderly. As Japan's population continues to age, many seniors find themselves without family, income, or social support. Women are especially vulnerable. Some survive by living in 24-hour internet cafes, while others, like this woman, find shelter wherever they can. Experts also noted that the country's extreme cultural emphasis on privacy and shame may have played a role in the woman's behavior. She didn't break into the apartment to steal or cause harm. She hid quietly, using as little as possible, trying not to be seen. When she was finally discovered, she was apologetic and offered no resistance. After her arrest, there was little public follow-up. Japanese media does not often publish details about minor crimes, especially when mental health or homelessness is involved. It's not known what happened to her afterward, whether she was released, placed into care, or disappeared back into the streets. No further information was provided by authorities. The man, too, remained anonymous. His identity was never disclosed. According to police reports, he was disturbed, but physically unharmed. It is believed he moved out of the apartment sometime after the incident. The apartment itself was not considered unusual, just one of many small, affordable units typical in Japanese cities. The overhead storage space where the woman hid was common, and many readers admitted they had similar compartments in their own homes that they rarely, if ever, opened. The 2008 Closet Woman case remains one of Japan's most bizarre and unsettling real-life mysteries, not because of violence or malice, but because of the quietness of it all. A person, unnoticed, living in another person's private space for a full year, with no sounds, no signs, and no trace. It's a reminder that even in the most seemingly ordinary lives, the extraordinary and the deeply disturbing can be hiding just out of sight. Sasebo schoolgirl murder. On the 1st of June, 2004, the city of Sasebo in Nagasaki Prefecture, Japan, experienced one of the most shocking and tragic crimes in modern Japanese history, and it took place in a quiet elementary school. The victim was a 12-year-old girl named Satomi Mitarai. She was a 6th grade student at Okubo Elementary School. Satomi was known as a gentle, quiet child. She had friends and attended school like any ordinary student. That morning had started just like any other, with classes, chatter among students, and the usual school routine. But around lunchtime, something happened that stunned the entire country. During a lunch break, Satomi was invited by a classmate, an 11-year-old girl in the same grade, to come to an empty classroom on the 2nd floor. The girls had been friends, and they often talked online. They were classmates, and there was no outward sign of any serious conflict. At approximately 12:25 p.m., inside that empty classroom, the 11-year-old girl suddenly attacked Satomi. She pulled out a box cutter, a utility knife used for crafts and art projects, and slashed Satomi's throat and arms. The wounds were fatal. The girl left Satomi bleeding to death on the floor and walked back to her homeroom class with bloodstains on her shirt and hands. Several teachers and students saw her and immediately realized something was wrong. When asked what had happened, she simply said, "This is not blood, this is ketchup." Teachers quickly discovered the scene in the other classroom, and Satomi was found lying in a pool of blood. Emergency services were called, but she was pronounced dead shortly afterward. The school was locked down, and the girl was taken into custody by police. Because of her age, 11 years old, her real name was never officially released. In Japan, juvenile offenders under the age of 20 are protected under the juvenile law, which prohibits identifying them publicly in most cases. However, internet users discovered her real name through leaked yearbook photos and online forums. She became widely known online as Nevada Tan, a nickname based on a class photo where she was wearing a University of Nevada hoodie. Her motive was revealed during questioning. She told police that she had become angry after Satomi had posted insulting messages about her online. They had been exchanging comments in an online chat room or bulletin board for students. The content of these messages was not officially released by police, but reports suggested it was name-calling or teasing, possibly about weight or personality. The suspect had brought the box cutter to school, although it was unclear whether she had planned the attack in advance or decided to carry it out that day spontaneously. During questioning, she reportedly said, "I'm sorry, I did a bad thing," and showed signs of remorse, but also confusion. Because she was only 11 years old, she was below the minimum age of criminal responsibility under Japanese law at the time, which was 14. As a result, she could not be tried as an adult and was not subject to criminal penalties. Instead, she was placed under the supervision of child welfare authorities and sent to a juvenile reformatory for psychological evaluation and treatment. Her case sparked widespread debate in Japan. Many questioned whether the age of criminal responsibility should be lowered. Politicians and commentators pointed out that someone capable of premeditated murder at age 11 might not be sufficiently addressed through the juvenile system. The incident also led to intense scrutiny of youth mental health, bullying, online behavior, and access to sharp tools like box cutters at school. Japanese society was stunned. Violent crimes in schools were rare, and crimes committed by young children were even rarer. The fact that a 6th grade girl had murdered her classmate so suddenly, with no visible warning signs, caused nationwide fear and grief. The internet played a strange role in the case. The photo of the girl wearing the Nevada sweatshirt became a viral image across online forums, especially in Japan and among Western anime and image board communities. The nickname Nevada Tan became part of internet subculture, especially on forums like 2channel and later 4chan, where she was sometimes depicted in memes or fan art, a disturbing example of how the internet can distort a real-life tragedy into digital folklore. But beneath the memes and internet gossip, the reality was simple and tragic. A 12-year-old girl was murdered by her friend in school over hurtful words exchanged online. Satomi Mitarai's funeral was held quietly, with her family requesting privacy. Her father, a well-known television announcer in the region, briefly appeared to thank the public for their support, but asked for space as they mourned their daughter. After her arrest, the suspect underwent extensive psychiatric evaluation. Japanese officials confirmed that she would remain in state custody for treatment and rehabilitation. No further public updates were released about her condition or her whereabouts due to strict privacy laws for juveniles in Japan. Years later, in 2013, there were rumors that she had been released from juvenile detention and was living under a new identity, possibly under state supervision. However, none of this has been officially confirmed. The Japanese government does not publicly disclose information about reformed juvenile offenders, especially in high-profile cases like this one. The case is still remembered in Japan both as a tragic act of youth violence and a moment that forced national reflection on mental health, online behavior, and the limitations of the legal system when dealing with very young offenders. It is taught in some legal and educational contexts and has been referenced in discussions about juvenile justice reform. As of today, no official criminal record exists for the girl, since she was below the age of criminal responsibility. Satomi Mitsurai remains the victim of one of Japan's most haunting child-on-child murders in modern times. Futoshi Matsunaga case. Between 1996 and 2002, Japan was home to one of the most horrific, twisted, and psychologically disturbing criminal cases in its history, the case of Futoshi Matsunaga. The crimes, which involved manipulation, torture, and the brutal deaths of at least 7 people, shocked the nation not only for their brutality, but for the way they unfolded quietly, without law enforcement intervening for years. Futoshi Matsunaga was born in 1961 in Fukuoka Prefecture. From an early age, he was described as manipulative, controlling, and unusually persuasive. He had a talent for talking people into doing what he wanted, even when it was clearly against their own interests. After high school, he became a door-to-door salesman, selling electrical appliances. During this time, he began to sharpen his ability to manipulate people emotionally and financially. He later ran a business offering fraudulent health and educational services, and was sued multiple times for embezzlement and fraud. These early crimes, however, were just the beginning. In 1985, Matsunaga married a woman named Hiroko. The couple had a child together, but the relationship quickly turned violent. Matsunaga began abusing his wife, both physically and psychologically. He was also serially unfaithful, engaging in numerous affairs. One of the women he became involved with would later become his accomplice in murder, Junko Ogata. Junko Ogata was from a respected and relatively affluent family in Kurume, Fukuoka. She was quiet and obedient, but after falling under Matsunaga's control, she became increasingly isolated. Matsunaga inserted himself into her life, gradually cutting her off from her family and convincing her that her relatives were abusive and dangerous. He manipulated her into believing that only he could protect her. What followed was a campaign of mental domination, physical abuse, and eventually murder. Ogata was beaten and tortured regularly. Matsunaga starved her, electrocuted her, and subjected her to psychological torture. He also sexually assaulted her and forced her to perform humiliating acts as a means of control. Over time, Ogata lost all autonomy and would follow his orders without question. He told her what to think, what to eat, how to act. This psychological domination laid the groundwork for the horrific crimes that would follow. The pair's first known murder occurred in 1996. Matsunaga and Ogata convinced a 34-year-old woman who had previously been a romantic partner of Matsunaga to come live with them. Once she arrived, she was confined, beaten, and eventually murdered. The exact details of her death remain unclear, but it's known that her body was disposed of secretly. Over the next several years, Matsunaga began targeting Ogata's family. He claimed that they were abusive toward her and needed to be punished. Between 1996 and 1998, Matsunaga and Ogata were responsible for the deaths of at least 5 of her family members, including her father, mother, sister, brother-in-law, and even her young niece and nephew. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was how the murders were carried out. Matsunaga didn't just kill his victims directly. He used psychological manipulation and torture to break them down mentally. In several cases, he forced family members to abuse or kill each other. He made Ogata's nephew help dispose of his own sister's body before being killed himself. The victims were subjected to prolonged physical abuse, starvation, and sleep deprivation. Matsunaga often used electric shocks as a form of punishment and control, attaching wires to victims and shocking them repeatedly. To maintain secrecy, Matsunaga isolated his victims from the outside world. He confined them in small rooms or apartments, cut off their communication, and monitored their every move. He made them distrust outsiders and even each other. This created an environment where escape felt impossible, and obedience became the only option. Over time, victims stopped resisting. The couple also extorted money from their victims. Matsunaga was skilled at coercing people into handing over their life savings, often under the guise of spiritual or psychological cleansing. He used fear, shame, and loyalty to get what he wanted. In many cases, the victims were so mentally broken that they willingly signed over money and property to him. In 2002, the horrors finally came to light. One of Matsunaga's last victims, a teenage girl who had been held captive and tortured, managed to escape and go to the police. Her testimony led to an investigation that uncovered the full extent of Matsunaga and Ogata's crimes. Police arrested both suspects, and during interrogation, Ogata began to confess. She revealed the locations of the crimes, the methods of torture, and how they disposed of the bodies. What shocked investigators was the complete lack of physical evidence. Matsunaga had gone to great lengths to eliminate all traces of the murders. He ordered the victims' bodies to be dismembered, burned, or dissolved in chemicals. In some cases, the remains were flushed down toilets or scattered in remote areas. This made it difficult for police to recover remains. But the testimony of Ogata and the surviving girl was enough to build a case. In 2005, Matsunaga was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. His appeals were rejected, and in 2007, the Supreme Court of Japan upheld his death sentence. He remains on death row. Ogata was sentenced to life imprisonment. The court acknowledged that she had been a victim of prolonged abuse, but ruled that she was still responsible for participating in the killings. The public reaction in Japan was one of horror and disbelief. The case revealed how psychological control and manipulation could lead ordinary people to commit unimaginable acts. It also exposed gaps in Japan's social and legal systems, particularly in recognizing signs of coercive control and domestic abuse. To this day, the Futoshi Matsunaga case remains one of the most chilling examples of how charismatic abusers can exploit others to do their bidding, leading to unspeakable crimes. The case is studied in legal and psychological circles as an extreme example of coercive control and group abuse. It also serves as a sobering reminder. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are not strangers in the dark, but people who slowly, methodically dismantle others from the inside out. Junko Furuta case. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old high school student living in Misato, Saitama Prefecture, Japan. She was described by friends and teachers as kind, bright, and responsible. She didn't smoke, drink, or get involved in trouble. She had a part-time job and was planning to start a full-time career after graduation. Her life was normal, until it was brutally taken away in one of the most horrific criminal cases in Japan's modern history. On the evening of the 25th of November, 1988, Junko was riding her bike home from work when she was approached by two teenage boys, Hiroshi Miyano, aged 18, and Shinji Minato, aged 16. Unbeknownst to her, Miyano was part of a local Yakuza-affiliated gang, and he had a reputation for being violent and feared. Miyano and Minato had planned to abduct a girl that evening simply for the purpose of assaulting her. Miyano had reportedly told friends earlier that day he wanted to rape someone. To lure her in, Minato kicked over her bike and ran away, while Miyano pretended to be a concerned stranger who offered to walk her home. Junko accepted, not knowing it was a trap. Instead of helping her, Miyano led her to a warehouse, where he assaulted her. From there, he took her to a hotel, where he called his friends Joe Ogura and Yasushi Watanabe. He bragged about what he had done and said he was keeping her captive. Miyano and the others forced Junko to call her parents and tell them she had run away and was staying with a friend. To avoid suspicion, they later brought her to Minato's house, where his parents lived. His parents were aware she was being held against her will, but they did not report it partly because they feared Miyano's gang connections. This would become one of the most horrifying aspects of the case: the number of adults who could have intervened but chose not to. Over the next 44 days, Junko was kept prisoner in that house. What happened to her during that time is almost unspeakable. She was raped repeatedly by all 4 boys and by other men they invited over. Police later estimated that she was assaulted over 400 times. She was also tortured daily. The boys used her as an object for their entertainment. They beat her, burned her skin with cigarettes and lighters, mutilated her genitals with foreign objects, and pierced her with needles. She was starved, forced to eat cockroaches and drink urine. Her injuries became so severe that by the 3rd week, she could no longer walk. Her internal organs were damaged, and her body was covered in burns, bruises, and cuts. At one point, her eardrums were ruptured, and she was unable to hear. She also lost control of her bladder due to the severity of the abuse. Despite her condition, the torture continued. The boys laughed while beating her, forced her to sleep outside in the cold, and hung her from the ceiling. On one occasion, she begged them to kill her to end the pain. Instead, they continued the abuse. On the 4th of January, 1989, after over 6 weeks of captivity, the boys beat her with a barbell and set her legs on fire. That night, Junko died from her injuries. The boys placed her body in a 55-gallon drum, filled it with concrete, and left it in a construction site in Koto, Tokyo. The crime might never have been solved if it weren't for a separate case. On the 23rd of January, 1989, Miyano and Minato were arrested for the rape of another young woman. During police questioning, they eventually confessed to the murder of Junko Furuta. The location of her body was revealed, and police recovered her remains from the drum. The public was horrified when the details came out. Newspapers dubbed her case the concrete-encased high school girl murder case. The graphic nature of the abuse she endured led to national outrage. Despite the brutality of the crime, all 4 perpetrators were juveniles at the time. As a result, they were tried as minors under Japanese law, and their identities were initially withheld. However, journalists later released their names due to the severity of the crime. Their sentences were widely viewed as shockingly lenient. Hiroshi Miyano received 20 years in prison, the maximum sentence for a juvenile. He was released in 2009 and later rearrested for fraud in 2018. Shinji Minato served only a few years and was later arrested again for assault. Joe Ogura also reoffended and was involved in gang activity after release. Yasushi Watanabe received a short sentence and has largely stayed out of public view. The case highlighted deep flaws in Japan's juvenile justice system. It led to public demands for harsher punishments for minors who commit serious crimes. It also raised uncomfortable questions about the bystanders, including Minato's parents, who allowed the crime to continue without intervention. Junko Furuta's funeral was attended by hundreds. Her former school awarded her a diploma posthumously. Her story has since become a symbol in Japan of the failure of society to protect the vulnerable and to hold dangerous people accountable. More than 3 decades later, Junko's case is still remembered, not only in Japan but around the world. It remains one of the most horrific, heartbreaking examples of cruelty, and it continues to be a call to action for legal reform and greater protection of victims. To this day, it is widely regarded as one of the most disturbing criminal cases in history,